Hi, as always, here is our story recap from this week. Another chance for you to watch the story from this Thursday's Big Fish Kids Club. And as always, make sure you stick around until the end, where I'm going to have a couple of questions just to make you think a little bit more about this week's story. So here you go. Hope you enjoy it again, just as much as you did the first time. Our story today takes place hundreds of years after our story last week about Abraham and Sarah. Remember, God promised Abraham, not that he was just going to have lots of children, but actually God had promised him a special land where his people were going to live. God's chosen people, the Israelites. And after hundreds of years and lots of problems along the way, finally, God's chosen people, the Israelites, had settled in the land that God wanted them to be in. And they'd lived there for quite a while, and eventually the people started to get a bit restless, and they decided that they wanted to have a king, just like the other lands around them had a king. And God tried to say to them, well, you don't need a king because you have, me, God said. I'm your king. But the people insisted, and so eventually God decided to put in place a king called Saul. And things started out okay, but soon things started to go wrong, just as God had told them was going to happen. And so one day God spoke to his special person in the land. You see, God had a special person in the land who was his prophet. And a prophet is just someone that God speaks to. And this prophet was called Samuel. And so one day, God said, Samuel, and Samuel replied by saying this by here. Samuel replied by saying, Lord. Because that was one of the special names for God, because Lord actually means to say that we know that God is actually the king of everything, the Lord of all, the boss of our entire lives. And that was what the case was for Samuel. That's why God had chosen Samuel to be his prophet, to be the one that heard from him and told the people what God wanted them to say. So Samuel said, Lord, I'm ready. What do you want to say? And God said, Samuel, I'm getting fed up with King Saul. He said he might still say that he follows me, but actually he's turned against me in this by here. He's turned against me in his heart. And we know that's true, don't we? Sometimes we might say things, but we know deep down inside that we don't actually believe it. We don't actually agree with what we're saying. Or, it might be a case that you hear somebody else saying something and you think, well, their words are saying that, but actually, do they really feel that down in their heart? And God had looked at Saul's heart, and he could see that Saul no longer wanted to follow him, and he said, I've got fed up with Saul. Samuel, I want you to go to Bethlehem. Oh, great thought, Samuel. I love going to Bethlehem. It's a great place. I love going there. It's amazing. And God said, and Samuel, I want you to take with you your anointing oil, because I'm going to tell you who is going to be the new king. Because you see, back in those days, and still today, actually, when a king or a queen is anointed, that means that they are the one that God has chosen who is going to be the king or the queen over the land. But Samuel said, well, God, there's a bit of a problem. I can't go and anoint a new king when we still have a king, Saul. If Saul finds out what I'm going to do, he's going to send some troops to come and kill me. You see, Samuel knew that actually God was his Lord, that he should do whatever God wanted him to do, but Samuel was also a little bit scared. He knew that it was the right thing to do because it's what God had said, but he was a bit afraid. And sometimes we can be a bit like that as well, can't we? We know the right thing to do. We know what we should be doing, but we might be afraid to do it. We know that actually if there's a new boy or girl in school, we should go and make friends with them and be nice to them and help them feel welcome, but we might be concerned what other people are going to say. Or if we see someone being bullied in the playground, we know we should stand up and let one of the teachers know, but again, we might be concerned of what they might do to us. And the Bible actually says that when we know what we should do and we don't do it, it's just the same as when we do things that we shouldn't do. That actually the Bible says that even when we don't do things we should do, that also, same as doing things we know we shouldn't do, causes a great big barrier. A barrier that causes a great big problem because it separates us from God. So Samuel didn't know what to do, but God because he's God, he knew exactly what to do. He said, Samuel, don't you worry. I've already got a plan. You need to take a cow with you and say that you're going to go and sacrifice the cow in worship to me, in thanks to me for what I've done. And then everything will be okay. Because you see, back in those days, to show how much people wanted to thank God and how appreciative they were to God for what all of he'd done, they would take an animal and they would sacrifice that animal, give it as a gift to God. Now, nowadays, we don't have to do that because actually God himself came and gave himself as a sacrifice for us. But I'll explain more about that in a bit. Well, anyway, Samuel started to get closer and closer to Bethlehem. And as he approached Bethlehem, well, word started to get around that Samuel was coming. Now, Samuel was a really important guy because he was God's prophet, but also people were a little bit concerned sometimes when Samuel turned up, because did that mean that God had a message for them? Was Samuel coming to tell them that actually they displeased God? They'd been doing things that were wrong. And so the elders of the town rushed out to meet Samuel. They said, Samuel, what's wrong? What have we done? What can we do to sort it out? Samuel said, don't you worry. It's all okay. I'm coming so that I can worship God with you, so that we can have a great big party and celebrate how amazing God is. I want you to gather everybody in Bethlehem and make sure that Jesse and his sons are there as well. Because you see, God had told Samuel that it was one of Jesse's sons that were going to be anointed as king. God had said, go and see Jesse's sons and I will point out to you the one who is going to be the new king. So everyone was really excited. Not only had Samuel come to town with a special message from God, but actually it was a good message. They were going to have a celebration. They were going to have a party. They were going to be worshiping God and praising him. It was going to be an amazing and incredible time. And so all the people in Bethlehem started to gather. And when everybody had sort of gathered there, making sure they had all their best clothes on, all the best things they could, ready to worship God with Samuel and sacrifice the cow, they were really, really excited to see what God was going to say, what God was going to do. And then Samuel asked one of the elders, he said, well, where's Jesse and his sons? And they said, oh, Jesse's just over here. And Samuel said to Jesse, he said, Jesse, I need to see your sons because actually God has chosen one of them to be a special person. And so Jesse brought up his first son to Samuel. And Samuel thought, wow. He thought, this guy looks amazing. He's tall, he's strong, he's handsome. Oh, he would make an incredible king. If people saw him standing up, they would want to follow him. He's going to be an incredible king. He's going to be fantastic. But as Samuel sort of looked at him thinking, well, I need to get my oil out ready. Here we go. Jesse's eldest son is going to be our next king. God said, Samuel, no. God said, Samuel, did you say no? No, said God. He's not the one. But God, look at him. He's big and strong and handsome. He's amazing. He would make a great king. No, said God. You see, he wasn't the right one to be the new king. See, God said to Samuel, Samuel, you're looking at what the person looks like on the outside. How tall they are, how strong they are, that kind of thing. But he said, but you see me, I don't look at what people look like on the outside. God said, you see, Samuel, the Lord, that's God, looks. At the heart. I don't just look at what somebody's like on the outside. I look at what they're like on the inside. And actually, when I look at this first son of Jesse, no, he's not the one. He's not the one to be king. Okay, said Saul. Well, okay, Jesse said, can you bring your next son out? So Jesse brought out his second son. And again, Saul looked at him and Samuel looked at him and thought, oh, well, he looks great. He looks fantastic. He's going to be a great king. And God said, no, the Lord looks at the heart. He's not the right one. He's not the one that I've said I want to be king. So they went on. And Samuel asked Jesse to bring out his next son. He brought out his third son. And again, God said, no, he's not the one. He brought out his fourth son. And God said, he's not the one either. He brought out his fifth son. And again, God said, no, he's not the one I've chosen. So Samuel's thinking, well, how many sons does Jesse have? He brought out his sixth son. And again, God said, no, he's not the one. He brought out his seventh son. And again, God said, he's not the one I've chosen. You see, even though they all looked like amazing and incredible, strong and tall and handsome guys, they weren't what God wanted to choose to be his king. Because actually, when God looked inside, he could see different things in their hearts that meant they weren't the right one for him to choose. And I wonder what God sees when he looks at our heart. Does he see that we've told lies, that perhaps we've stolen things, perhaps we've cheated, perhaps we've got into fights, perhaps there are people that we feel hate towards, perhaps we just moan quite a lot about the good things that God has given to us, or perhaps we feel angry sometimes. What will God see as he looks at our hearts? And that's a big problem that we have to think about, because actually, because God looks at our hearts, he sees everything, doesn't he? He sees the good things we do, but the problem is he also sees those things we know we should do that we don't do. But he also sees those things that cause great big problems, things that are wrong in our lives that actually separate us down here on earth from him. You see, it's these things that we do and think and say that are wrong that separate us from God, that stop us from getting to know him and being part of his family. Well, Samuel was starting to think, well, what am I going to do? He said, Jesse, you've brought out 7 sons. Is there anybody else? And Jesse said, well, yeah, there's one more, but, well, he's my youngest son, my smallest son. We didn't bring him to the party. He's actually out tending and looking after the fields. Samuel said, bring me your youngest son. What's his name? He's called David, said Jesse. Bring David to me. And the others were probably thinking, really? Really? He's not going to want David to be this special chosen person. David's just the smallest and the youngest of all of us. Maybe you feel like that sometimes as well. Maybe you feel a bit small and, left out by other people because you don't feel that important. Well, I want to tell you that actually, even if other people might not think you're that important, there's somebody who thinks you're so important. So important, in fact, that they came and did the most amazing thing for you. I said, didn't I, that back in these times, the way that you had to show that you were sorry to God and the way you showed you were thankful to God was by actually sacrificing an animal. But God didn't want it to be like that. God didn't want us to have to continue like that. In fact, what God did is he came himself and sacrificed himself so that if we put our trust in him, we could be forgiven. You see, what God did once for all time was he came down out of heaven. He lived a perfect life. And then at the end of his life, he was placed upon a cross. And as he died on that cross, he was actually taking upon himself the things that you and I have done wrong. So that if we were sorry for those things and turned to him and said we were sorry and put our trust in him, we could be forgiven for what we've done that are wrong. Then actually he said he would come in and clean up our hearts on the inside. He would get rid of all these things that we've done that are wrong and give us a brand new heart, a brand new life, and allow us to be part of his family and one day get to be with him in heaven forever, which is the most amazing and incredible thing. And God thinks that everybody is so special that he came to do that for everybody, so that anybody would have the possibility of being able to turn and put their trust in him. Well, after someone had gone out to the fields where the sheep were being looked after, they brought David, small and young as he was, down to see Samuel. And when Samuel looked at him, he thought, I guess this is the one. He said, God, is this the one you've chosen? And God said, yes, Samuel. I've looked at David's heart, and he's a man after my own heart, and I want him to be the next king. And so Samuel took out the oil, and he poured the oil over David's head, which everybody knew meant that he was choosing David to be their next king, that God had said that David would be their next king of Israel. But you see, God didn't just choose David to be king. God actually made a promise to David as well. He said to David that he would be with him always. Even when David messed up, even when David did things that were wrong, God was still with him, because God knew that David was a man after his own heart. God had looked at David's heart and he could see who he was. And you see, God says as well that actually, if we've put our trust in Jesus, when he looks at our heart, he will see people who are people after his own heart. because he will have taken out our hearts that are broken and messed up with all the things we've done that are wrong. And he will have given us a brand new heart so that we can be his children and one day be with him forever. Do you know, I love the story of David and how God looked at his heart. But I think it's even more amazing that actually, even though I've messed up, even though I've done things that are wrong, actually God can look at my heart and think that I'm good enough to get into heaven. Not because of what I've done, but because he's replaced my heart with Jesus' heart. He's given me Jesus' perfect record because I turned and put my trust in him because of what he did on the cross. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story and just make you think a little bit more about how we might look at people and judge people from what they look like on the outside, but God really cares about and looks at what we're like in our hearts. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story just as much as you did the first time. But here's a couple of questions just for you to think about, to think a little bit more about that story. So the first one is, can you remember why did God no longer want Saul to be king? What had Saul done that meant God didn't want him to be the king of the Israelites anymore? The second one then is, when Samuel saw Jesse's sons, they were big and strong and handsome, but what was the problem? Why didn't God want them to be king? And why did he choose David to be his king instead? And lastly, what did I say about how if we've put our trust in Jesus, what does God now see when he looks at our hearts? What does God see because actually he's replaced and given us a brand new heart? Well, tough questions a little bit, but hopefully you can work them out. Ask your mum or your dad, whoever's at home with you, to give you a bit of a hand if you're not sure. And if they're not sure, then message us. We would love to help you out with some of the questions and just help you to understand a bit more about what God is trying to say through his amazing book, the Bible. Well, I hope you enjoyed, and we look forward to seeing you in Big Fish next Thursday. Bye.